joining us is a gentleman who is no stranger to the Observer. Let me say a pleasant good evening to Barataria Juan MP Saddam Hosein.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Viewers.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking time out. I know it's a hectic time. Everyone wants to weigh in on the budget presentation that, of course, was presented yesterday by Finance Minister Juan MP. But before we get into that, I just want to, of course, bring this up and, of course, our viewers. Something that was said by the Prime Minister ushering this new year with 2024. And he said that in welcoming 2024, Prime Minister Rowley says that he's pleased that the government can state that it greets the new year with a renewed sense of optimism. He mentioned the strengthening of TNT's energy base, enhancing the nation's infrastructure, improve the conditions for investment, and continue attempts to improve and make the daily lives of citizens safer. Is that what we got yesterday, Mr. Hussein?
I think the population saw it for themselves that this was one of the longest, most uninspiring budgets that provided absolutely no hope for Trinidad and Tobago, especially when it comes to that area of national security. I believe it was only after 3 hours that we see the minister glossed over with a fleeting glance with respect to the issue of national security. Same broken promises, nothing is going to materialize. We have seen 10 consecutive budgets of mismanagement. Now, people tend to believe that money is an issue in this country with respect to national security, and today I want to say that is absolutely not true. National security has been getting the biggest, or sometimes the biggest allocation with respect to the budget right after education. And we have seen that that money has gone into waste and mismanagement. The issue with respect to national security is not so much the money and the resources, but it's really the management of the resources. You see, I like to use statistics when I'm going to prove a point here. Trinidad and Tobago has an issue with respect to porous borders. And we have heard the stories, the horror stories of what takes place with respect to the Coast Guard. And I want to give Trinidad and Tobago, and I hope your viewers and listeners are listening carefully to this, because I'm going through the estimates of expenditure. Those are the yellow books that are provided by the Ministry of Finance to tell us exactly how much money is allocated, what it's allocated for, and at the end of the financial year, how much was actually spent on that particular item. So I want to take you to the draft estimates of the developmental program for national security.
Right.
And there's an item called purchase of vehicles and equipment for the Coast Guard. So this deals with equipment for the boats, repairs, whatever arms, ammunition they would need. Would you believe that the Coast Guard was allocated $1.5 million for equipment for the Coast Guard? You know how much money they spent last year from that?
How much?
Not a single cent. Not a dollar. Not a dollar after being allocated $1.5 million with respect to that particular spend. Let me take you to the fire station and the fire service. The purchase of vehicles and equipment for the fire service, they were allocated $11.2 million. You know what they spent? $740,000. And $1 million. And we have seen the horror stories where, I don't know if you remember, the pensioners were burnt in a home because they couldn't get fire tenders at their own time. These are just some of the expenditures that I want to just point out with respect to national security.
Go right ahead.
When you look at the SSA, we know of the collapse of what is taking place in the SSA. The SSA last year spent $202 million, and this year they're going to be allocated $270 million. That's $0.2 billion.
Wow.
So this is the spend that they're having on SSA, which is the intelligence apparatus agency of the country. And you cannot at all see any sort of value for money. The intelligence agency in Trinidad and Tobago has collapsed. So when you have systems that should have been working together, the intelligence system detecting, monitoring where the guns, ammunition, drugs are coming cross-border within our borders, then you have to line up your Coast Guard to protect the borders. Then you have to have the TTPS on land to ensure that they intercept those who may cross the borders, immigration, customs. When I just outlined just 2 or 3 of those items where they have under-resourced and not spent any money because, not they didn't have the money, because they choose not to spend the money because of poor management, we now have a proper explanation why the crime situation is where it is. Appointing a new Minister of National Security in the person of East Scotland is not the solution. Keeping Hines there is not the solution. The population must wake up now and realize the only solution is the United National Congress. We understand the national security apparatus and how it should be managed. That is why crime was at the lowest when we were in power for that last period, 2010 to 2015.
And so I want to jump in here. You're so correct when you talk about the fact that, after 5 hours and 15 or 12 minutes, whatever the case may have been, I mean, it was long, one would think that the true essence would have been there, as far as the meat in all of this, a better understanding of what citizens are living on a daily basis. But again, it seems as though that has evaded this administration, totally out of sync, don't seem to understand. And we expected to hear more, especially on this situation, but you're talking about the Ministry of National Security. As it is today, 487 murders for the year so far. So we are talking about over 4,500 murders in the last 9 years. And one would have thought that this would have been the best opportunity. Listen, if you couldn't come at a budget with pixie dust and tokens and goodies, at least have something that is going to give us confidence in this system dealing with the criminal aspect of it.
All right. Look, you're spot on with respect to this. You remember last year they indicated that they're going to hire 1,000 new police officers and then they're going to purchase 200 new vehicles for the police service.
That's right.
That was not done. Now I hear Minister Imbert promising that they're going to buy 2,000 police vehicles. They couldn't buy 200, but they want us to trust them that they can buy 2,000. The first phase being 500 vehicles next year. We cannot at all trust this government when they speak on these matters, especially on issues with respect to national security. Those 1,000 officers, we in the United National Congress had called, for example, for the SRPs who receive a lower remuneration package to have been absorbed within that 1,000 recruitment exercise. That was not done. It would have been easier. You would have had 1,000 more boots on the ground, and then you had a vacancy with respect to SRPs, and it's easier to bring SRPs into the system and then afterwards regularize them. That was not done. The government clearly is not thinking. They have no plan. And I want to give you an extent here, because you spoke of the criminal justice system also, and that has to be turning the wheels as the national security apparatus detects, charges, prosecutes. We have to look at where these prosecutions are taking place. The Chief Justice lamented budget constraints and staffing constraints in his opening address to the law till 2024-25. There's an expenditure here in the estimate where they have allocated $5.2 million for the restoration of the San Fernando Supreme Court. Do you know they've only spent $563,000 or $500,000 out of that $5.2 million? And they want to tell us that they're serious about getting it right in Trinidad and Tobago. They cannot. The books are here. These are the black and white books, numbers that are before us, evidencing the truth to Trinidad and Tobago, that whatever they say in the parliament and they say on the platform is not what is taking place.
And I agree with you. I mean, yesterday, of course, the minister's budget was titled Steadfast and Resolute, Forging Pathways to Prosperity. But before we even start laying this out, we have to look at the whole historical element to all of this. You have the Honorable Opposition Leader Kamala Prasad-Bissessar in her draft, in her statement, saying, when this government came into office in 2015, they inherited the largest economy in our history. I want to repeat that. They inherited the largest economy in our history, largest stock of foreign reserves, and record high employment, which her government produced. Today, nearly a decade later, they have brought us to near ruin, destruction, and chaos. If you're coming to tell us, of course, time again that you can see clearly now, the rains have gone or whatever, we have turned things around, and again, that it seems to contradict everything. Now we are being told that steadfast, forging pathways to prosperity, and tighten your belt, and things are going to get better in 2027. I mean, what are we really looking at here?
I'm glad that you raised that point. And if you listen to the leader of the opposition yesterday, she grounded that statement where they inherited the largest economy based on the foreign reserves that we left in 2015. I believe there was import cover for over a year, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's fallen to under 6 months now in terms of forex import cover. Then you compare that statement where they say that they put pathway towards what they call it prosperity and steadfastness, but they want to move towards a cashless society, and persons cannot use their credit card beyond a particular limit to access forex in this country. And that is why businessmen are complaining about the shortage of forex. So you want to go cashless, encourage people to use credit card, and when they use the credit card, there's not enough forex loaded on it from the commercial banks because, again, of fiscal mismanagement and the inequitable distribution of foreign exchange in Trinidad and Tobago. And that is a very serious issue, and that is partly why we have seen a slowdown and stymieing of our economy. The minister in that 5 hour gave a recap of the last 9 years, and they could barely point to a single achievement after spending close to $500 billion in the last 9 years. They have spent over $400 billion in Trinidad and Tobago, and they cannot account for it. And that goes on the heels of the Auditor General of Trinidad and Tobago telling them, listen, I can't find $3 billion that you all claim you have collected. And then the minister comes with a new budget and says absolutely nothing about the understated revenue from that particular fiscal year. And that brings very serious ramifications in terms of the confidence and the accuracy of the data and statistics that this government provides and presents to the population.
That's right. You're talking about over $500 billion. The government, according to the Honorable Kamala Prasad, has wasted in the past 9 years. And what's interesting, when she did mention, of course, that while they speak of minimal growth in the last 3 years, Mr. Imbo did not mention that this minimal growth is driven by heavy government borrowings and withdrawals from the country's savings and not from sustainable activity. Means that they didn't generate this revenue, they didn't come up with something that was implemented, that was giving us this steady income stream. Here it is, we're talking about borrowing. I mean, let's break it down to the lowest common denominator. If you are, of course, in a home, and let's say you are unemployed, unfortunately, you and your wife, whoever, are unemployed, and you are simply trying to keep your head above water by dipping into your savings, I mean, at some point in time, that is going to be depleted. There's no new revenue coming in. There's nothing happening, nothing to sustain whatever commitments you have, bills that are coming in. And this is quite disingenuous of the government to come and sell to us that there has been growth, when in fact that growth is not based on anything that has generated revenue from any policy or plan that they would have implemented.
Correct. And again, that is a very interesting perspective to look at it from. There have been no new revenue streams. You remember 1 year he pegged the entire budget on diversification. Nothing has been done to diversify the economy. In fact, we have now seen the lowest production of oil and gas in Trinidad and Tobago, I believe, since the 1960s. And there's no new revenue stream. Falling production levels, meaning less money for Trinidad and Tobago. Increased borrowing, meaning more of taxes going towards debt servicing, paying loans, paying interest. And therefore, that cannot be a sustainable way forward for Trinidad and Tobago. We have to get serious about this. When you compare the 5 years of the People's Partnership Government, 2010 to 2015, to the 10 years or 9 years of the Rowley administration, 2015 to 2024, look at the vast difference and the difference in the budget. That People's Partnership Government spent less than half of what the Rowley government spent so far. And you have seen hospitals, the San Fernando Teaching Hospital, the the Coover Children's Hospital. You have the Racket Center in Tacarigua. You have the state-of-the-art Olympic school in Coover.
Right.
You have highways being built, roads being serviced, drains being desilted, building of and strengthening of local government corporations. Every single sector, there was a mass development during that particular period. What the Rowley administration has done, they spent more money than the partnership administration and gave you less for the money that they have spent. We have not seen value for money. At all, there has been no value for money. So there has been a gap, a gaping hole with respect to the vacuuming of our nation's monies and taxes, especially when it comes to this government. They have been the most corrupt administration we have seen. Everything built is either in problems or it has fallen down. Look at what they did with the Mosquito Creek, or what we call the Mosquito Crack. The Claxton Bay highway, where they tried to repair a piece of it and it collapsed. We have seen when they built the red houses, the roof was leaking, the ceiling was in need of repair. Anything they touch has ended up in destruction. As soon as rain falls in this country, they have to find sandbags because the place flood. So when the streets are not filled with flood, it's now filled with blood. And that's the reality of our country.
And what's interesting as well, education was allotted 7.512 billion. So we're talking about 7.512 billion dollars. Quite a bit of money. You had an experience. I think it was one of those schools that you were there for the opening in your constituency. After that, we were told by the Minister of Education that as far as doing works and repairs on these schools, the money is not there. They simply don't have it. And yet they got a large chunk of the 2025 budget. Again, this just simply does not add up.
Education always gets the largest chunk of the budget. I mean, they spent $10 million in repairing the St. George's School. And that $10 million was for a piece of a roof. Today, we have seen the images of the school being flooded. The classrooms were in a state of disrepair. Again, it goes back to corruption and mismanagement of the taxpayers' money. There's clearly evidence now, a blind man can see it now, that we have to question this government where the money goes, because the money went somewhere and it did not go for the benefit of the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah, and we heard a lot of things that were repeated. I mean, we heard about infrastructure work that was done sometime way back. We heard about things that this government did not build, but I guess if they had to maintain it and do remedial work, they included that as well as something that they could lay claim to. We also, of course, heard about he was somewhat kind of not trying to get into the real core of TNTech and as far as rate hikes. But many citizens believe that once the dust settles, that's something we have to look forward to, as well as property tax, and no telling what else as far as even water rates. I mean, there was nothing there that the takeaway would have been that for the average citizen, there was some sense of relief, and I think that's the word itself, relief. He did mention time again about the most socially vulnerable, those who were at the bottom of the economic ladder, but those were just things that were mentioned. There were no programs or policies or anything that seems to be on the drawing board for this administration to put in place to assist these very same people that were mentioned yesterday by Mr. Imbert. So what happens to those folks who are the most vulnerable, as he spoke about?
Correct. You would see billions of dollars being allocated towards what we call vanity projects, buildings and rental and all of these high expenditure items. But Minister Imbert laughed at the people yesterday when he said, listen, I am not going to increase any of the social grants in this country. People can barely survive with the level of assistance that they get from these social programs, public assistance, food support, all the other grants that are available. In particular, old age pension. why didn't the minister find it fit to cut some expenditure in some larger, wasteful areas and channel that money towards the vulnerable in society, like the old age pensioners, like the children, like those who need the public assistance, single mothers and single fathers who are suffering, who can't spend money to get to their schools, to get an education, which is the key out of poverty. Those are some of the areas that we will be examining closely with respect to the upcoming budget debate. And I want to tell you, look out, because we are going to examine very closely the expenditure of the Election Boundaries Commission. Because as in an election year, they have been allocated about $22 million in short-term employment. And we will be looking very closely at the expenditure of the Elections and Boundaries Commission.
Yeah, and I think that, definitely you need to put that spotlight there and on many things as well, because the takeaway again for many citizens, those who are confused, those who simply couldn't sit through the full duration of that presentation, or those who are just simply waiting to hear, listen, is there anything in there at all that is going to benefit myself and by extension everyone in Trinidad and Tobago? That was not there. For example, something as foreign exchange. And you know, that in itself has been quite a challenge. The central bank reported that our net foreign exchange reserves have collapsed by more than 50% from US 10.5 billion or 12 months import cover in September to 5.5 billion as at July 2024. He made no mention of how it is that the average citizens can finally get access to foreign exchange. You hear people complaining about their child is studying abroad and they need to get money to their loved ones, they need to do business and what have you. That was not addressed in any form or fashion. And if it did, it just simply glide through. Road infrastructure, of course, we mentioned. He repeated several projects and what have you. As a matter of fact, with this administration, I think it's the first time it's been mentioned that we have bridge and road inspectors. We don't know what their duties are. We don't know how they function in that capacity. But it just keeps going on and on. And what do you say to citizens who say, listen, we've already had enough? I mean, how much more can we take of this? You're making a fool of us. You're making a mockery of the system. And you're simply not delivering.
Let me just give one example. And it's comical. I don't know if you remember the march in Bridges U. They cut a ribbon opening this march in Bridge in Kunapia. And you know the next week they have to close the bridge to do work on it? And this is what we have to get from this government. I not told you, anything that they have built ends up in collapse. The foreign exchange issue, as you mentioned, as I said before, there is inequitable distribution of the foreign exchange. Maybe the conglomerates are rubbing shoulders with the politicians and the ministers, and maybe that's why it's easier to access foreign exchange in that regard. But the ordinary small businessman who advertises on TikTok and Instagram cannot get foreign exchange to bring in goods, and their businesses have suffered and are unable to grow in this country. The government has created an environment that is not sustainable for business growth, for economic activity, in fact for leisurely activity, because now if you're not afraid to spend your money, you're afraid to go out of your house because the bandits are waiting and lurking to rob you, murder you, kidnap you. And that is where we are in this country. Many persons I interact with on a daily basis, they plead and they say, Saddam, if this government wins the next election by some stretch of the imagination, they are packing up their bags and leaving this one sweet island of Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah. Closing comments, go right ahead, MP.
Without revealing too much, I just want to encourage the population. The budget is very important to the future of our country. There will be a lively debate that will be beginning on Friday, 10 a.m., where the leader of the opposition will be the first responder to Minister Imbert. I encourage you all to tune in for a comprehensive response on that uninspiring budget. The leader is carded to outline the plans for Trinidad and Tobago when the next UNC government takes the reign of power in order to bring back safety, security, and peace in Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you so much. Always a pleasure to have you on. Best of luck to you and the entire team, and keep up the good work.